The first skirmish in my family's screen time battle happened when our oldest two kids were only 5 and 3. Some well-meaning relatives gave us a Nintendo Wii, thinking we'd have fun playing together as a family. We thought we would too. David and I had both had old-school Nintendos growing up, and we thought it would overall be pretty harmless and fun. We also worried that if we banned video games completely, we might make them even more tantalizing. We didn't want to be that family with so many rules and restrictions that our kids would just want to spend all their time at their friends' houses playing video games. We figured we'd set limits, and then it would just be a fun thing we'd bring out once in a while. Something in the background. Yeah, right. Even at their young ages, video games sucked them in like Mario to a drain pipe. We let them play about a half hour at a time, and not even every day. Yet, when they weren't actually playing, they were scheming about how to get me to let them play, or they were talking about the next time they'd get to play. I was shocked at how quickly they became obsessed. Finally, I'd had enough. The Wii had taken over our lives. I boxed it up and made a bargain. I offered to quote-unquote sell the Wii and use the money to buy a big Lego set they'd been wanting. We told them we would rent it from time to time from the video game store. By that, I meant that we would take it out of the box in our closet and let them play once in a while. They totally went for it. And once it was out of sight, they soon forgot about it, and I ended up passing it on to another family member. We didn't have to pretend to rent it even once. I was pretty proud of that little negotiation. Mom 1, video games 0. This is the How She Moms podcast with Whitney Archibald. I'm a mother of 5 on a mission to help moms connect with your kids, manage your homes, and create your own unique version of motherhood. I curate ideas from different moms so you can pick and choose what works for you and your family. That small victory from the intro has been followed by many more screen time battles, and honestly, I have no idea who's winning at this point. What I do know is managing screen time is as exhausting as listening to your kid describe their Minecraft world. The episode I intended to release today, and which I almost finished writing, was How She Manages Screen Time. It was going to include a range of great ideas from some really smart moms about how they regulate screen time, when they give their children their own devices, how they deal with social media, etc. But it was not a fun episode to write. As I compiled clips from interviews and started putting them all together, all of their wise ideas that sounded so great during the interview fell kind of flat out of context. It made managing screen time seem artificially easy. Just gradually give the kids more and more freedom until they figure out how to manage screen time, and wham, zap, pow, they're responsible adults. That first draft filled me with mom guilt about all the things I should be doing better and gave the illusion that everyone else has this figured out. And then I realized, if it's not fun to write that episode, why would it be fun for you to listen to? My overall theme for that version of the episode was that instead of making tech a battlefield, we should turn it into a classroom, teaching our kids how to use tech in healthy ways so that they'll eventually be able to manage their own screen time. Do I believe this is a better way? Yes. Have I actually traded my weapons of war for a chalkboard and apple-themed sweater? No. It still feels like a battle. And so, instead of that episode full of solutions, I'm going to tell you about some of my own struggles to manage screen time and the things I've learned along the way. And then you can still listen to the interviews I've done with experts in their individual episodes. I've just realized that on this topic, it's better to hear their advice in full context. I'll be releasing the last of those in my next episode, an interview with Alex Fales of Mindful with Media. And you can find a complete list of all the screen time episodes I've done in my show notes. The truth is, we're all learning to navigate high-tech parenting by lots of trial and lots of error. So in this episode, I'll share some of the many tactics we have tried in our family, from micromanagement to laissez-faire and everything in between. And to make it more fun, I'll try to squeeze in as many cheesy media similes as there are movies in the Marvel franchise. Prepare for some real groaners. Let's start by addressing the most frustrating thing about managing tech. Like every other aspect of caregiving, there is no one-size-fits-all solution because every child is different, every mom is different, yada yada. But the most infuriating thing about trying to manage tech is that not only are the kids growing and changing, but the tech itself is changing too. So just when you think you've found a system that works, you've got a new device or social media platform or parental control system to figure out. To add another layer, the kids get smarter too, so they find ways around your systems. We parents are left in the dust, like Wile E. Coyote chasing the Roadrunner. That's why experts like Andrea Davis of Better Screen Time, whom I featured in episode 68, talk a lot about helping to build your kids' internal filters so that when external filters fail or are easy to circumvent, your kids will make wise decisions about what to watch and how to use screens. I love this advice, and I keep trying to teach these things to my kids. We're all getting incrementally better at it, but progress is as slow as dial-up internet. And we've all made lots of mistakes along the way. But after years and years of this slow progress, the most amazing thing is starting to happen. As our teenagers, the kids from that opening example, are approaching adulthood, I'm starting to see them actually get the hang of managing their own tech and setting their own limits. So I'm going to organize this episode into the 3 main types of tech we manage in our home: TV, gaming, and phones. I'll start with TV, or maybe we'll just call it passive entertainment, because you can watch shows, movies, and YouTube on really any device. I'm starting with this one because it's the one I'm best at managing, mostly because it's the easiest to monitor. When my first 2 or 3 kids were little, everything was pretty smurfy. I was in full charge of the TV. I chose what and when they watched. As a result, they didn't even know that shows like Caillou existed. I carefully curated their viewing, which consisted mostly of Peep in the Big Wide World, a funny and clever show that teaches rudimentary science, and Little Einsteins, which introduced them to classical music. I even made a playlist of the songs that were on the show to listen to in the car. It was lovely. We watched Sesame Street too, back when it was on PBS, and I even curated my favorite Sesame Street clips from childhood on sesamestreet.org to show my kids, since I'm a pretty big fangirl of that show. In fact, if you go to howshemoms.com and search for Sesame Street, you'll find a post with 10 of my favorite clips. I sometimes also just let them watch whatever was on PBS while I showered or got stuff done, so there was some Daniel Tiger and the lovely Word Girl thrown in, with a few others. Still no Caillou allowed. We eventually discovered the joy of Phineas and Ferb, and added those delightful fellows to the mix, and I introduced them to some of my childhood favorites like Animaniacs. Sure, the kids sometimes begged for more TV time, or I let them watch more than I thought I should, especially when I was pregnant. But even though I didn't realize it then, those were the Screentime golden years. By the time the younger 2 came along, we still introduced them to those shows we loved, but they also just watched whatever the older kids watched. And since the older ones could now work the TV, it was much more of a free-for-all. I started to lose control. Now we have 3 TVs. One's in our bedroom, which I know many people discourage. But hey, sometimes we like to watch TV in bed together at the end of the day. Another one is in my husband's office, and one is a projector in the basement. I control these TVs using a device called Circle, which allows you to control any devices connected to your Wi-Fi. There are many other ways to do this, including often just your router itself. We still have a first-generation Circle, which is working fine for us. I use it to set bedtime so the kids can't stay up late to binge their favorite shows, and I can pause the TVs anytime I don't want the kids to watch, like when the house is a mess or it's dinner time. These days, I'm not super good at keeping track of how much or what shows the kids are watching, but the TVs are in pretty public places, so I don't usually have a problem with the kids watching inappropriate things. Except for YouTube. I do have a rule that the kids can only watch YouTube on TVs, not their own devices, again, so it's a more public activity, and my youngest knows that he's only allowed to watch it when he's with the older kids. He frequently ignores this, however, and watches really annoying pranky videos with a lot of yelling. Why do they always have to yell? The videos he watches are usually more annoying than harmful, but it's too easy for kids to stumble upon things that are actually harmful on YouTube, so I try to enforce that rule. The other problem we often have with TV is just time wasting, like the oldest ones binging their favorite shows. One of my sons has watched all of the seasons of Psych like 5 times, and they've probably all watched the entire Malcolm in the Middle more than once. No objection to these shows or the others they've binged, but yikes, so many hours. And it's so easy to just watch one more episode in this era of on-demand entertainment. However, at least TV shows have an ending, unlike most video games these days. And you can just click a button to know when that ending will be. So when I want my kids to wrap it up on the TV, I usually just let them finish the episode if they're close to the end. The problem is, sometimes they agree to turn it off and then I get distracted and they sneak in another one. One trick I learned from someone, and I'm sorry I can't remember who, is that one way to make turning off the TV a time of connection rather than contention is to sit and watch the end of the show with them. And then as the ending credits come on, ask them to fill you in on what happened earlier in the show, or ask them to tell you the best part of the episode. Then you can turn it off while you're still talking about it and connecting instead of the kids begging to watch more. Plus, it's a way to show you're genuinely interested in what they care about. When I remember to do this, it works pretty well, as much for the older kids as the younger. I've set most of the devices to shut down at 7 o'clock so we can eat dinner if we haven't already, read scriptures together as a family, and start getting the younger kids to bed. For several months last year, though, we were having Wi-Fi issues and I couldn't use Circle, so I got to see what my kids would do without those structural boundaries. That's when TV viewing went off the rails. I realized then just how much I depend on being able to just shut down the internet access. Most of them are not ready to set their own boundaries yet, so this is a lifesaver. Summer is always the trickiest time for monitoring TV time for me. I want them to enjoy the freedom of summer, but I also want them to be outside playing. I've tried several different boundaries for summer. One summer, we just had a window from 1 to 3 where they could watch during the hottest and most sunburny time of the day. That worked pretty well, since the kids all knew not to even ask me at any other time, but it did make for more arguments about who got to watch what during that time. Most summers, I usually just have a list of 5 things, one for each finger, that they have to do before TV or video games. Clean their bedroom, their bathroom, do their kitchen job, exercise, and music practice. Often they procrastinate their chores so much that they never get around to watching TV, or they have so much fun in the exercise stage that they forget about the TV. But usually they get their stuff done and collect on their TV time. Even then, it's not just a free-for-all. I usually limit them to 1 or 2 hours, depending on the day. As for what they watch, I know that many of the streaming services also have parental controls that let you filter content that's appropriate for kids. That's one area we haven't had a problem with much, so I haven't explored that. As much as our kids struggle with time limits, they're pretty good about watching shows that David and I think are appropriate and asking if something seems questionable. We loosely follow the rating system, flawed as it is, but the kids generally just know to run anything by us that's rated PG-13 or higher. We generally avoid R-rated movies altogether, but there are some PG-13 movies that we find more inappropriate than some R-rated movies, so we take it on a case-by-case basis. One of our favorite tools for this is one you probably know about, commonsensemedia.org, but one of my friends had never heard of it, so in case you haven't either, I'll explain. It's a site that reviews movies and gives detailed recommendations about what age the movies are roughly appropriate for. It identifies potentially problematic content and even explains the plot lines and themes of the movies so you can make educated decisions about whether it fits your values or not. This is one of the main skills I want to teach my kids about watching shows and movies, to be deliberate about what and when to watch, and not just turning on the TV as a default. But despite some of the challenges of TV, I actually think it can be a great way to bond. It's definitely the most communal form of media in our home, especially as compared to phones and even video games. For example, we have a tradition of watching a show with our 3 youngest kids on Thursday nights. Right now we're watching Alone, just like my family used to do with The Cosby Show. Besides just an excuse to all be together, it gives us something to talk and laugh about, inside jokes, and some good snuggle time. One of my favorite experiments with TV time started as a solution for when my 2 oldest boys were fighting like Garfield and Odie. We started what we called teen time and let them watch TV while we put the younger kids to bed. It actually worked amazingly well. They looked forward to watching their shows together each night and actually started getting along much better. They've kind of gotten out of the habit now between homework and other interests, but it definitely did the job when we needed it. Who knew TV would bring them together like Phineas and Ferb? Okay, now for my arch nemesis, video games. For a long time, the only way our kids could play electronic games was on our family desktops. Minecraft has always been the main game they were interested in. I've always controlled those desktops with a password, so the kids had to ask for permission. They've used several clever methods to hack those passwords, but one of the lowest tech methods is just to catch me when I'm busy and weak and ask me if I can enter the password. I cave like Homer Simpson in a donut shop and give it to them. Sometimes I just let this fly for a while, and soon everyone knows the password. The result is as predictable as a Scooby-Doo plotline. For a while, they keep their usage under control, trying to prove that they can handle the password power. Then it slowly creeps out of control until they all know the password and spend way too much time on the computer. In fact, especially with summer starting, it's time for me to reset the password again. One of my little tricks for myself to keep my resolve to keep the password secret is to create the next password based on the reason I had to crack down again. So the most recent one was missing work, since my kids were playing on the computer before they finished the homework they were supposed to be doing. Before that, the password was Night Owl because one of my kids was sneaking the computer late at night during the time that Circle wasn't working. I don't remember all my creative passwords, but I do remember that one of them was just the non-specific "kids are the worst." When I caved and gave that password out, my kids were like, "Hey!" I was joking, kind of. What I constantly tell my kids is that I want them to control their own screen time as much as they want to, which is why I keep letting them try it. It's as annoying for me to have kids always asking for screen access as it is for them to have to ask. We have the same goal, for heaven's sakes, for them to eventually manage their own screen time in a healthy way. So I'll probably keep letting them practice their self-control in spurts and reining it in again when it gets out of control like a Muppet on a drum set. The question that always makes me second-guess myself is whether my boundaries are helping them gain more self-discipline or if they're teaching them to be sneaky and find workarounds. I'm always looking for that sweet spot of mutual trust, but we're definitely not there yet. After we sold our Wii, as I mentioned in the intro, we didn't get another game console until the Christmas right after our oldest son turned 15, about 2 years ago. What pushed us over the edge was talking to friends who had also resisted for a long time, but eventually bought one for their teens. They told us how they'd been nervous about it, but that it ended up being a good bonding activity for the boys. Our kids had been asking for years, so we decided to get an Xbox, and I hate it. By and large, it has not been a bonding activity for our kids. We bought several controllers thinking they'd play together, but with a few exceptions, most of the games they really like to play are, according to them at least, more fun to play alone. It has also added one more device that I have to manage with an app that lets me set time limits, and one more thing for them to ask for. We're actually even thinking of unplugging it for the summer because we just found out they started a new account outside of our family plan so they can just play with no time limits. The tricky thing is, though, it feels like punishing all of them for something just one of them did. So we'll have a family conversation about it this week and decide if we'll let him delete it and give him another chance. Since I just conveniently brought that up, one of the best pieces of advice I've gotten about setting screen time boundaries and really any family boundaries is to make it a family conversation so everyone has a chance to weigh in on the solution. The problem is, screen time discussions at our house are usually about as peaceful as a showdown between Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd. As much as I'd love to go all master of the universe on them and pull all the plugs, we usually come up with a compromise to try. I know I could just get rid of the Xbox once and for all, like I did with that first Wii, but as painful as it is to manage, I do feel like they're slowly learning to have more self-control despite this most recent breach. For now, I think we'll just take a break from it for a bit. Maybe we just need a little detox. One of the trickiest things about video games specifically is the fact that they're designed to keep kids playing for just one more minute because they literally do not have an ending. It's genius on the game designer's part and murder on a mom. I can actually sympathize. I don't like being abruptly yanked out of something when I'm right in the middle of it. But these video games are all middle, like Malcolm himself, with no real beginning or end. Holy tiny computer, Batman! The time has come to talk about phones. I was one of those parents who once swore my kids wouldn't have smartphones until they had graduated from high school. I'd look at kids at the park with phones and roll my eyes in disgust, as judgy as Judy. And then my oldest son started 7th grade, and it started getting really annoying for him not to have a phone, especially when trying to pick him up from somewhere. The other annoying thing was that without a house phone, it was tricky to leave him alone babysitting without a phone. He could use an iPad with Wi-Fi to FaceTime us, but the annoyances were mounting up like Uncle Scrooge's gold coins. So we were very careful about it, researching the best ways to introduce a phone. I actually signed up to buy one of the very first Gab phones back when it was still a Kickstarter, but I got nervous since it hadn't even come out yet and I backed out. So we bought him a flip phone. It had a few dumb games on it, but it was just annoying enough to use that he didn't really waste time with it. Or so we thought. What we didn't realize is that even the clunky little flip phone could access the internet. I still can't imagine why anyone would want to, because it was a tiny screen and you could only access it with the T9 keys and the arrow buttons, but apparently it wasn't too annoying for him. Eventually we realized he was staying up late watching YouTube on his Flintstones-era phone. I immediately confiscated it and tried to figure out how to shut off the internet. After a trip to the Verizon store, I found out there was no way to shut it off and there was no alternative. They didn't sell one phone that didn't have internet access. So I made what felt like a really weird move. I activated one of our old iPhones for him and trashed the flip phone. It felt so counterintuitive, like I was rewarding him for his sneaky behavior. But by that time, iPhones had the Screentime app built in, so I could limit the phone to just calling and texting. He didn't have a web browser or games and definitely no social media. And he could now access our family music account, which was a game changer for this kid who adores music. He also loved having a camera. I'm actually really glad that I ended up having to eat my words about the smartphone thing. I was so inflexible about it and so judgmental about the other kids who had them that it was nice to be forced to be humble and open-minded. I also think it's good to model this for our kids. Sometimes this means changing our policies as technology changes, or even having different rules for different kids based on what each one needs. It's good for our kids to see us learning more and then acting upon that knowledge. Choosing what kind of phone to get your kids and when is such a personal decision that the answer can be different even in the same family. Is that fair? I actually think yes. It's not equal, but it is fair. You are fairly doing what you think is right for each one, even if that looks different. So we ended up giving our next two boys iPhones when they started middle school, which is 6th grade here. We set the same limits, no browsers, social media, or games. And they can't download apps unless I give them permission. Downtime starts at 9:30 every night. Great. But also not so great, because they're smart, like most kids of their generation, and they've come up with all sorts of hacks and workarounds. They'll figure out the Screentime password and take off restrictions, or sometimes the Screentime app just totally glitches and I don't catch it for weeks. The sneakiest one is that several times they've figured out how to access YouTube through other apps, as random as guitar tabs and an app that controls my son's electric scooter. So it takes a lot of work on my part to manage their devices. I try to check their screen time stats at least once a week to make sure nothing is amiss, but it definitely makes me feel like Candace Flynn trying to bust my boys. To avoid this feeling that I'm always trying to catch them breaking the rules, I've been trying to check their screen time stats with them on Sundays to see how their week of tech has gone and how they feel about the amount of time they spend on their phones that week. This leads to good discussions and often to adjustments on their restrictions. But sometimes the day gets away from us and I remember to check their stats at 11 o'clock on Sunday night. I freak out and take everything away and they wake up to all sorts of restrictions. I'm not exactly proud of this. One of the rules that pretty much everyone I interviewed suggests is that phones should not be allowed in bedrooms at night. Some even extend that to a rule that phones aren't allowed in bedrooms ever. At first I thought that rule was kind of irrelevant because our kids' phones went into downtime mode at bedtime. But again, they've found all sorts of workarounds for that, so now we have a charging station in our bedroom and the kids have to bring their phones in by 9:30. Our enforcement of this rule kind of ebbs and flows though because I'm kind of a zombie after 8 o'clock and I often forget to make sure they turn their phones in. Or I remember after I'm all cozy in bed and I don't want to get out and collect them. If only I had go-go gadget arms. We're actually in crackdown mode after we were pretty relaxed for a while. So we're enforcing a rule that if they don't remember to turn it in themselves, they don't get to use their phone the next day. So that's the rule for 2 of our sons, but we've actually relaxed with our oldest recently because he's been really good at going to bed at reasonable times and has shown that he doesn't abuse the privilege of having his phone. We've been just generally easing up on his restrictions as he's gotten older and has proven that he's good at managing his own phone usage, because in just a year he'll be out on his own and we want him to have that discipline. Now our 4th child is about to start middle school. She wants an iPhone like her brothers got. But now, simpler, kid-friendly phones like Gab and TrueMe are well established, and they work great. And this time, we don't have any extra iPhones lying around not being used. So it doesn't really make sense to buy a fancy $600 plus phone just to dumb it down, so she can say she's getting an iPhone like her brothers did. We haven't decided which brand to buy yet, but they seem like the best option, mostly because they'll require so much less effort on my part to monitor. As for social media, we've allowed all our boys to use Be Real since it seems like one of the safest social media apps. And they've all been really responsible on that app. But we recently let our 2 oldest boys get Instagram as well. This has been a work in progress, as we've realized sometimes that they're spending way too much time on it. So we've played around with different time limits, and sometimes we've just made them take a break for a while and delete it completely because it was such a time sucker. I could go into detail on some of the other apps that we have and haven't allowed, but the bottom line is that as parents we keep learning through trial and error, and so do the kids. I could go into detail on other apps that we have and haven't allowed, but these are always going to be changing, and your kids will want different apps than our kids want. The bottom line is that as parents, we're going to keep learning through trial and error, and so will our kids. While I sometimes wish I could throw all the devices away and be a parent in the 80s, that's no longer our reality. As much work as it is to teach these kids how to use technology in healthy ways, I think it's worth the investment to incrementally give them more and more control over their own screen time choices. I even think these skills of self-control will help them in other aspects of their lives. As you figure out your own approach to screen time, I wish you as much luck as that Care Bear with the shamrock on his belly, as much strength as Popeye, as much wisdom as Mr. Rogers, and as much patience and creativity as whatever Bluey's parents are named. Thank you so much for listening to the How She Moms podcast and for being part of this community. There are so many other ways for you to connect and hopefully also contribute. I share tips and ideas regularly on Instagram and Facebook at How She Moms. You can find past episodes and other resources at howshemoms.com. And you can always just email me directly at whitney@howshemoms.com. Special thanks to my own wonderful mom, Susan Singley, for recording my theme music. She played this song all the time when I was growing up, and to me, it's the soundtrack of motherhood.